Welcome, YouTube family, for this week's sermon on February 2nd, 2020. We've got a lot of juicy topics to cover today, but the first thing I wanted to start with is go ahead and write this down as a fantastic reminder. Peace is active, not passive. Peace is active, not passive. And much of today's talk is going to go into that. And we're going to be covering two different themes today. We're going to be talking about in Dunisha, our spiritual practice of midwinter and what it symbolizes for us. And we're also going to be going into mental hoarding and why we're actually starting a 7-week cleanse in Dunisha, covering the first 7 topics of living peace, starting with mastery of thought, which is associated with mental hoarding today. And it's going to be quite fun. So we'll go ahead and take another deep breath and jump in. First analogy I want to start with, though, is think about a tree, especially we're in Colorado and we get some wonderful seasons here. But think of trees that shed their leaves. How many of us consciously shed ourselves as we transition into spring from winter, or we transition from fall into winter? And I'm inviting us to imagine this day, February 1st, is actually our start of the Dunisha spiritual year, because it's midwinter and it's the day that yang energy, the yang energy, the active principle starts to increase. So it's the return of yang, whereas August 1st is the return of yin. And the reason why I like the analogy of the tree is if we're about to prepare ourselves to go into spring for March 21st, the first day of spring, are we carrying forward all the old dead leaves on our tree? Or have we allowed ourselves to fully shed them all so new life and new experiences can grow? Who's ever had to prune something before or trim something? And have you noticed that if you don't prune the dead off of it, it really stunts the growth for the next year? And what's interesting is with us humans, we don't tend to consciously do this for ourselves. Some of us do if we have practices, but a lot of times we kind of just, we don't observe the seasons necessarily, and we roll from one year into the next year, into the next year, one season into the next season, into the next season. And in Dunisha, we really like to honor and make sure that we give ourselves a spring, a summer, a fall, and a winter. And so let me go ahead and read what I wrote down. Have you allowed yourself to rest this winter? Or have you been holding tight to things long past their expiration date? Negative or positive experiences, it's all the same, that we must actively practice letting go to give room for new experiences and the freshness of life to bloom. And so we can recognize thoughts like leaves that we're holding on by the consistency that we're revisiting them in our mind. So this week is all about, this first week of our 7-week cleanse in preparation for the spring equinox, is all about taking note and taking stock of all of the thoughts and the memories that we've been holding on to from the past year, or maybe even years past. Maybe we have some dead leaves on our branch that are still there from 10 years ago that we're just holding on to, we're cherishing. But the interesting thing about memories is that they provide not a lot of nourishment. When we're holding on to positive or negative thoughts of the past in a way that it takes us out of the present moment, it keeps us from actually experiencing the full aliveness of this moment. And that's the big importance of this idea of mental hoarding and cherishing either positive or negative, or our treasured suffering. Who has a victim story, right? And how does that sometimes become our identity and how we pitch ourselves to people. I always loved meeting new people or going on first dates back in the day, because I would always be able to take stock of my mental headspace, because what I was leading with in the first conversations with people really denoted where I was at in my life and in my headspace. And so how was I introducing myself to the world? What were the stories I was telling people? And how was it labeling myself? How was it pigeonholing myself and the way that I was just sharing my experiences? And what's fascinating is through these teachings over the years, my story has completely changed. And some of you who've been with us for a while now may actually recognize that too, that maybe you started with one version of the truth of your past, but then as you have made peace with it, it's transformed and blossomed into the same truth, but from a different angle that uplifts and nourishes you rather than keeps you trapped in suffering. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that juicy? But really think about that. When we carry over dead leaves from the past, these memories and these thoughts that aren't serving us, and bringing them into the present moment or into the future years, we have to recognize that they're not alive. And because they're not alive, they can't nourish us like they used to. Even if it was the most juicy, wonderful, perfect leaf while it was alive, we have to allow that to pass. We have to allow that leaf to wither away and pass and return to the soil, because once it goes into the soil, when we let all these thoughts, memories fall down from us and enter into the soil, it actually becomes part of our nourishment. It can't nourish us up here, but once it becomes fertilizer, it can nourish us with a stable ground of stable awareness, of sturdy awareness, if you will. Isn't that cool? I love this analogy. The trees, they just keep giving. And that's why our logo is the ever tree. You know, our logo is the tree of life. So let's just think of mental hoarding, and this is where you can fill in the blanks. And for those of you watching at home, I'll go ahead and post this PDF in our Dunisha Sanctuary online group if you'd like to follow along. So thoughts, mental hoarding. Some examples are thoughts about the past and future, actually. Anything that takes us out. Because what's fascinating is that we could be anticipating the future 10 years ago and being all bent up about it, but then 10 years later, we might be having the same damn thought where we're still in anticipation. So it's almost like it never goes away, but it's actually a past thought that we're actually thinking, but it's actually about the future. It's a mental whiplash, but you get what I'm saying, I hope. And then we have negative experiences we've had, and then emotionally fueling thoughts and memories. And the fourth one is what we cherish and hold tight, which can even be our treasured suffering. Our treasured suffering. And so our practice this week is to invite freshness. Inviting freshness into our life and making sure, taking note of really sitting with ourselves maybe a few times this week and noticing already, since we're a month into this new year, noticing what has been resurfacing already from 2019. What has been resurfacing that you struggled with last year, that you're still struggling with this year, and the only thing keeping it alive is your own mental neurosis. Your own tendency to pick. And again, it's not about judging ourselves. It's not about right, wrong, good, bad. It's more just about recognizing that it's winter, it's midwinter, and it's a wonderful opportunity to give yourself a rest and stop beating that drum. And the practice is going to be actually writing these things down that you're wanting to put to rest, bury in the ground. And each week for 7 weeks, you're going to write something down. And then on the spring equinox, we're going to put all of these together and have a ceremony with them, blessing them, honoring them. Maybe we'll bury them, maybe we'll burn them, we'll see what happens. But we're preparing ourselves for the spring, and we're pruning ourselves. I think that's the next fill-in. Yeah, we cleanse ourselves to make room for new experiences, aka right now, this week, mental pruning. Mental pruning. And something else I was thinking of is how we enter each seasonal year really matters drastically. We don't think it does, but going off of what we were just talking about, if we look at how nature prepares itself for each spring and how it goes through this transformation and how it allows and gives room for new life to flourish, why the hell aren't we doing that as humans, right? And so, are we taking time every single year to mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually prepare ourselves for the literal and metaphoric spring of our lives? And here's what's beautiful. Even if it's been a shit year, you have a new year. You have a new seasonal cycle. It's kind of like some of us, maybe none of our crops grew in the summertime. Maybe we had a rough harvest. But what's beautiful, as nature teaches us, is there's always the following year to where maybe we'll learn a few lessons in how to tend the soil better and how to prepare better. And then we're able to take those lessons into the next year. Isn't that cool? And so what I guess I'm just trying to point out is honor the seasons more and recognize that you're not separate from nature. As humans, especially this past century, we've really separated ourselves from this idea that we're not even part of nature. We always say, we love nature. I want to go out in nature, but we never actually say, I'm part of nature and I love myself. And I actually live and breathe with the seasons. You see how that can change our mindset? And are you starting to see how we're going back to how peace is not, it's not passive. Peace is very active. And having these rituals, these annual rituals and this cleansing and honoring midwinter, and then again, we're going to honor midsummer when it comes to August 1st. When we have these days that are designated throughout the year where we check in with ourselves, it really brings us back to the practice, especially if we have been lax for maybe a month or so. And all of a sudden, oh, here's this other thing that comes around that reminds us the season is changing. Once again, let's come back to it. Pretty cool. I'm going to read that next paragraph, and I actually have a yin and yang symbol there for us. Both are actually correct. You can say yang or yang. So in Dunisha, the return of yang energy is our spiritual start of the year, February 1st. Our cleanse begins and we work through 7 living peace tenets, ending with release the mundane on the spring equinox. The spring equinox represents renewal and balance, which concludes our annual cleanse, which I think is just so fantastic because it's 7 weeks leading from this day into the equinox. And when we get there, we've all heard of spring cleaning before, right? And so release the mundane is the tenet it concludes on, which is perfect because that's the day where we're bringing all of these elements together, not only the physical, but also, like I said, we've been preparing ourselves every week with a different intention. And so it's going to be this awesome spring cleansing ceremony and ritual that we'll do together as a community, but also individually in our own homes. Isn't that delicious? And so let's take another deep breath. There is a quote, I don't have it exactly, but I have some of the notes of it written down. Thich Nhat Hanh had a beautiful quote that said, you go up to your parents, or maybe you're a child of your parent, and you say, I have a gift for you. And then the parent says, well, what's that gift? And then you point to yourself, and you say, me, I'm the gift. And then it goes on to say, I am fresh as a flower. I am calm and peaceful like still water. I am solid as a mountain, and I am free as space. It is this freshness, this solidity, this peacefulness, and this freedom that is my greatest gift that I have to give. And he then goes on to say that when you love people, those are the gifts that you want to give most. The freshness, the solidity, the peacefulness, the freedom. But when we don't have that within ourselves, it's really hard to love people because he doesn't say this, but I'll tie it in. We get trapped in our own neuroses. We get trapped in our emotions, our attachments, our anger. We have these crunchy, crispy leaves on our tree and we won't let them go. And then we think that they're nourishing us. And then maybe we're trying to grow fruit of our practice, or trying to grow apples, or trying to grow pomegranates, peaches, whatever it might be. But if all we have are these crunchy leaves that can't absorb sunlight, is it any wonder why we're not able to bear the fruit of peace to give to other people, the fruit of freshness, the fruit of solidity, the fruit of freedom? Because what ends up happening is that we're so starved for nourishment and nutrition that we actually, rather than giving to others, we're probably trying to suck the life force from everything around us, getting what we can. Who's ever been in a fear complex before? Fear stems from the idea of lack. And the number one thing that is our opportunity in Dunisha is to make sure that we are nourishing ourselves with the practices on a daily basis. Because if we're nourishing ourselves with peacefulness, with peace, with freshness, with solidity, with spaciousness, with freedom, what ends up happening is that even when external circumstances don't go well, we're able to keep that solidity and that freshness. Isn't that juicy? Isn't that delicious? I love it. I love this analogy. And so let's take a deep breath. So I have the yin and yang symbol here. And so see that point where the white just barely begins, the tail of the white? That's today, or rather that's yesterday. It's the very beginning of the return of yang. And then August 1st is the tail of the black. And it's this beautiful dance and this beautiful harmony. And it just slowly starts to build, and it reaches its climax in summer. And then once again, the yin starts to build and reaches its climax in winter. And it's this beautiful dance of our lives. And so the yin-yang symbol in Taoism, it represents all of life, and we are part of life. It represents all of nature, and we are part of nature. And so maybe already, like anytime these transitional, these cross-quarter days or the solstices and equinoxes happen, I can almost feel a different energy in nature. And it's really beautiful to tap into this and recognize that transformation is always occurring all around us. And it's important to have this dance, because if you stay too long in one, you're going to grow stagnant. There's going to be a sterility that occurs. Life cannot flourish. You must have both. So let's take a breath. So in winter, it's a time of rest. It's a time of deeper reflection. And it's a time to really, I don't really prefer the word tapping into our shadow self, but there is view that in a non-bad or wrong way. When I say the shadow, it's not bad or wrong, but it's the part of ourselves that we may not like, or we may not prefer, or the part of ourselves that we judge. And so that's why this 7-week cleanse that we're going on is going to be so delicious, because we're going to be really getting intimate with the parts of ourselves that we may not prefer normally, or we may tend to avoid. And the reason why we must acknowledge them and embrace them is so that we can then understand them better and then transmute them. And then once the spring hits and we come to the spring equinox, then that's going to be starting a new cycle. Pretty cool, yeah? So let's take one breath. So the last things we have to fill in, for those of you, if you didn't get the yang right there in Dunisha, the return of yang right there in the paragraph. And then I have a few more things at the bottom. So February 1st, we fill in midwinter. May 1st, we fill in mid-spring. August 1st, we have Midsummer. And then November 1st, we have Midfall. And so these are the cross-quarter days that occur as holiday celebrations, softer holiday celebrations for us in Dunisha. And then our primary holidays are the equinoxes and solstices. And so I'll go ahead and just end with just why do we practice Dunisha? Why we practice the philosophy of living peace and the spirituality of Dunisha, and how this all ties together is that it's a lifestyle that encourages us and invites us to really contemplate our peace every single day, to really contemplate how we're showing up in our relationships. And what I love about it is that the wisdom of the spirituality is seen in nature all around us. We're not teaching anything that's blind faith, because all you have to do is just go outside and see the wisdom. And when you combine that with an understanding of human psychology, you develop a lifestyle, a peace practice, a spiritual practice that really tends to your soil and allows you to develop deep roots into the earth, that allows for that solid trunk and then those ever expansive branches to eventually bear the fruit of peace to give other people. And again, as we know, we always start the living peace code. We constantly return back to peace. It is the greatest gift we can give anyone. But recognizing too, the peace that we're talking about is not passive, it's active. And it's not just meaning I look peaceful on the outside. It's saying I actually have inner peace on the inside. Isn't that groovy? So let's take one more breath. And so it is. Next week, we'll be going into the week 2 cleanse, which is going to be involving mastery of impulses. And we'll be tying in some of our addictive tendencies that we're looking to release this next year. And so we thank all of you for joining us online, and links are down below for anyone who would like to donate and support us. We definitely appreciate it, and we hope to see you next week. Mwah! Blessed be.